The city was restless that night. Snowflakes drifted down through the amber glow of New York streetlights, settling into soft layers against gray buildings. Inside a small cafe called Maple Roast, warmth clashed with the cold. The hiss of the espresso machine, the soft hum of jazz, the clatter of mugs. At the back, a man sat hunched over his laptop. Nathan Hale, CEO of TransGlobe Logistics, was usually a figure of order and control. But tonight, the glow of his screen reflected only panic. A French shipping contract filled his inbox, dense with annexes and clauses he could not decipher. Millions were on the line. A single mistake could sink shipments across the Atlantic. His translators were unavailable, the clock ticking toward disaster. He rubbed his temples, defeated. Then a gentle voice broke the silence. "You look like you're having a bit of trouble with French." "I know a little. I could take a quick look if that's okay." It was Ellie, the cafe's barista. Blonde ponytail, steady hands, a familiar face from countless morning coffees. She wasn't prying, just offering. Nathan hesitated, then turned the laptop toward her. Ellie leaned over, scanning the screen with calm precision. Her voice was low, steady. She translated each clause, each legal phrase, not only correctly, but with nuance that even professionals often missed. She spotted fees disguised in vague wording. She clarified liability hidden in the fine print. She moved from French to German, then to Spanish, catching subtle traps along the way. Nathan watched her, stunned. "You know all three of these languages?" he asked. Ellie poured more coffee into his cup, her eyes never leaving the screen. "6," she replied softly. Nathan leaned in, now desperate to see how far her knowledge went. He opened the Italian annex, the kind of section most people skimmed, the kind that bled companies dry. Ellie frowned, tapped the screen. A loophole. Warehouse charges hidden in technical phrasing, a trap that could cost millions. She grabbed a pen, scribbled a clearer version on a napkin, tight, sharp, impossible to twist. Nathan exhaled like a drowning man reaching air. He looked up, a whisper escaping. "Dinner. I owe you dinner." Ellie's expression softened, but she shook her head. "I have to pick up my son. Daycare closes at 7 o'clock. And just like that, she turned, coat in hand, disappearing into the snowy night. She saved a global empire with a pen, then vanished into the snow. Who exactly was Ellie Winters? Nathan told himself to let it go. A stranger had stepped in, saved him, and walked away. That should have been the end of it. But when something shakes the foundations of everything you thought you knew, it doesn't simply fade. It lingers. So later that evening, long after the cafe had gone quiet, Nathan found himself parked across the street. His luxury sedan was out of place on that block, engine off, headlights dimmed, as he watched the cafe door through the drifting snow. Then she appeared. Ellie, her scarf pulled high over her chin, her blonde hair tucked under a beanie. She moved quickly, purposeful, but not rushed. At the side of the building, she crouched, and when she stood again, she wasn't alone. A small boy clung to her shoulders, his thin coat too light for the biting wind. Nathan's chest tightened. The boy's cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, but he didn't complain. He simply let his head rest against her, as if this was routine, as if the weight of the day was nothing compared to the comfort of her arms. Nathan followed, not close enough to be seen, but close enough to bear witness. He trailed as Ellie stopped at a narrow grocery, its flickering neon sign buzzing above the door. Inside, she moved with quiet efficiency: bread, eggs, bananas. The basics. At the end cap stood a bright display of holiday chocolates, wrapped in gold foil. She paused, just for a moment. Her hand twitched forward, then dropped back. She walked on. At the register, she paid in cash. No hesitation, no extras. Practical. Precise. Survival masked as routine. Nathan's throat was tight as he watched her step back into the night. Groceries balanced, her son shifting on her hip. She walked through slush and flickering lamps until they reached a squat brick building with peeling paint and a porch light that hadn't worked in years. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and disappeared inside. Nathan sat frozen in his car. He didn't know what he had expected to see, but it wasn't this. The snow was thicker now, falling in heavy sheets, muting the sounds of the city into a soft hush. Nathan returned to that same street, his breath clouding as he stepped out into the cold. In his hands, a small paper bag. He stood at the base of her building, looking up at the dim windows. The bag felt heavier than it was. Inside lay things she had refused herself earlier that night. A box of crayons, a stuffed polar bear, a pair of child-sized gloves, a few chocolate bars. At the very bottom, folded between the gifts, was a plain white envelope with several bills tucked inside. Not wealth, not extravagance, just enough for warmth, enough for breathing room, and a card. On it, in his steady handwriting. Thank you for saving an entire global shipping route with a pen and a napkin. This is only gratitude. No strings attached. He climbed the steps, set the bag gently by her door, and stood for a long moment in silence. No knocking, no explanation, no request for thanks. Then he turned, footsteps crunching softly in the snow, disappearing back into the night. Morning light streamed across the glass facade of Transglobe Logistics. The lobby gleamed with polished marble, humming with the rhythm of power. Employees hurried past, briefcases in hand, eyes fixed on their screens. And then the rhythm broke. Ellie stepped inside, her son's small hand tucked into hers. She was out of place amid the designer suits and swift strides. Benji clutched a worn stuffed bear, his eyes wide as he looked up at the towering ceilings. In her other hand, Ellie held a white envelope, folded flat but gripped tightly. She approached the desk. I'm here to return something to Mr. Hale. It's personal. The guard looked her over, unimpressed. Mr. Hale doesn't take walk-ins, especially not without credentials. I understand, Ellie said softly, her voice polite but steady. If you could just tell him. Ma'am. The guard cut her off, his tone sharper now. I can't let you through. Please step aside. Ellie froze, the weight of the moment pressing down. She bent to adjust Benji's scarf, using the motion to steady herself. Around her, eyes flicked in her direction. Whispers followed. Is she lost? No. I think she's trying to see the CEO. Ellie swallowed hard. She hadn't come to cause a scene. She hadn't come for attention. She only wanted to return what wasn't hers. And then it happened. A voice, sharp and commanding, cut across the marble space. She's not a stranger. She's the reason this company didn't lose $2 million last week. Every head turned. At the far end of the lobby, Nathan Hale stood, coat still on, briefcase in hand. His gaze didn't waver as he began walking toward her. The guard stiffened, employees froze mid-step. The cafe girl was no longer invisible. She stood now at the center of a billion-dollar empire. The cafe girl was no longer invisible. She now stood at the heart of a billion-dollar empire. The marble lobby seemed to shrink around them as Nathan closed the distance. He stopped in front of Ellie, the envelope still clutched tightly in her hand. Benji pressed closer to her side, sensing the weight of the moment. Ellie lifted the envelope, her voice low but clear. I didn't want to keep the money. I didn't help because I expected anything. I helped because someone needed help. The words hung in the air, fragile but unshakable. Nathan didn't glance at the envelope. He looked at her, not as the man who owned the building or the empire it housed, but as someone who knew he was standing in the presence of something rare. Ellie continued, her voice firmer now. If you still need help, with contracts, with translations, with whatever it is, I'd rather do it the right way. Not as a favor. As a job. Nathan nodded once, his tone measured, almost reverent. Welcome to Transglobe. And with that, the envelope no longer mattered. What mattered was the line that had just been crossed. The days that followed moved quickly, each one folding into the next. Ellie became a quiet presence inside the glass tower. She was given a small desk tucked near the legal and translation department on the 12th floor, far from the chaos of logistics. At first, the employees glanced at her curiously. A barista among corporate consultants? A young mother navigating multi-million-dollar contracts? But the questions soon gave way to silence. Not because Ellie explained herself, she never did, but because her work began to speak louder than anyone could argue. She saved a shipment from being delayed in Sao Paulo by correcting a Portuguese customs clause. She spotted a mistranslated Korean liability term that had slipped into a contract worth hundreds of thousands. She revised freight agreements in Mandarin with the same ease she once used to steam milk at Maple Roast. Her notes were neat, her corrections surgical, her presence steady. She did not boast, did not overstep. But Nathan noticed. Always, he noticed. The way she switched between languages as if her mind simply shifted gears. The way her brow furrowed when a clause was dangerous. her pen pressing a little harder to the page. And though she had become part of his company, she still remained a mystery. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Nathan passed by her desk. The glow of the city spilled through the windows, streaks of red and yellow blurred by the falling snow. Ellie was still working, scrolling through a Singapore freight clause, murmuring quietly to herself as she restructured its meaning. Nathan paused in the doorway, then stepped closer. His coat hung over his arm. His voice broke the silence. "I have a question." Ellie looked up. Her eyes were tired, but steady. "I still don't understand," Nathan said slowly. "You're fluent in 6 languages. You can catch things most legal consultants miss. How did that happen?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the soft white outside. When she finally spoke, her words were quiet, almost fragile. "When life doesn't translate for you, you learn to translate it yourself." Nathan didn't press. He didn't need to. He understood enough. They sat in the quiet together, side by side near the glass. No titles, no roles, just silence shared between two people who both knew what it meant to survive without anyone else to explain the world for them. What else had life forced Ellie to translate? What was she still keeping hidden? It was a crisp winter morning when the balance cracked. Ellie was bent over her desk, reviewing a dense batch of French shipping terms, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then froze. Her chair scraped back as she stood abruptly. Nathan, passing in the hallway, caught the look on her face. "Everything okay?" he asked. Ellie swallowed, her voice tight. "The daycare called. Benji has a fever. They need me to come." There was no hesitation from Nathan. No weighing of schedules or meetings. He simply grabbed his coat. "Where is he?" "Upper West Side," she replied, already reaching for her bag. "I'll drive." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words fell away. He was already walking toward the elevators. The city blurred past in streaks of gray and white as they rode in silence. When they reached the daycare, Ellie rushed inside. Benji lay curled on a cot, cheeks flushed, forehead warm. Ellie crouched at his side, whispering his name, smoothing back his hair. Behind her, Nathan stood unusually still. When she tried to lift her son, his voice was gentle. "Here, let me." He carried Benji to the car with the practiced ease of someone who had done it before. At the hospital, he waited outside the room, fetched coffee without asking, leaned against the wall like a quiet anchor. When evening came and Benji finally slept under soft hospital sheets, Nathan's voice broke the quiet. "You know, that kid's Italian pronunciation is sharper than mine." Ellie managed a faint smile. "Loves when I read to him in different languages. He thinks it's magic." Nathan looked at her, then at the boy. "It is." The shift came quietly at first, like a draft slipping under a closed door. It wasn't loud. It wasn't open. But it was there. Glances exchanged near the elevator. Conversations that paused when Ellie walked into the room. Jokes whispered just loud enough to sting. "She used to make coffee downstairs, right?" "Yeah. Crazy how fast some people climb when the CEO notices them. She must be really good at something." Laughter followed, low and sharp. Ellie kept her focus. She combed through a Turkish freight contract, corrected a mistranslation in a Russian customs clause, completed an entire quarterly audit 3 days early. Her work was flawless, professional, precise. But still, she felt it. The air shifting around her. Emails arriving colder. Slack messages stripped of emojis. People who once greeted her with warmth now reduced to polite nods, or nothing at all. And then one afternoon, walking past a conference room, she heard it. "The latte linguist," someone snickered. "She probably steams contracts better than milk." More laughter, pointed, deliberate. Ellie said nothing, but something inside her shifted. That night, when the office was empty, Ellie stayed behind. Her desk was a small island in the silence, lit only by the glow of her screen. She gathered her things quietly. A USB drive, a notepad filled with scribbles in 5 languages, and a framed drawing Benji had made. Her at a desk, the title in block letters, "Mom at Work." She placed a resignation letter on her desk. No drama, no tears, just the quiet dignity of someone who knew when it was time to leave. The next morning, she returned early to finish her last tasks. File transfers, badge return, clean exit. She was sorting through the last of her folders when she heard footsteps. Nathan stood in the doorway, coat still on. His eyes moved from her nearly empty desk to her face. His voice was steady, but carried weight. I heard. Ellie didn't look up. Nathan stepped closer and placed a file in front of her. A thick binder, meticulously labeled. Inside, the finalized framework for the Internal Language Systems Initiative, a project Ellie had quietly built, a blueprint to unify TransGlobe's multilingual operations. The corner was stamped. Approved. On top sat a white card. The lettering crisp, certain. Ellie Winters, Director of Global Language Integration. Ellie stared at it, her breath caught. Nathan's voice didn't waver. It's not a promotion. It's a role you created. One this company didn't even know it needed until you walked in. Ellie's voice, when it came, was low but firm. I don't want a title handed to me because of whispers. Or out of pity. Nathan's gaze was steady. I'm not handing it to you. I'm naming what you've already built. The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, snow drifted steadily past the window, indifferent to the storm inside. Was this recognition, or the start of an even deeper scandal inside the empire? The office was hushed, the kind of morning where the world felt wrapped in glass. Outside, flakes of snow drifted endlessly, coating the city in muted silence. Inside, the only sound was the faint hum of the heater and the soft shuffle of Nathan's footsteps as he waited for Ellie's answer. The binder still lay open on her desk, the card with her name gleaming against the white paper. Director of Global Language Integration. She lifted it slowly, her thumb brushing across the raised lettering, but her voice was firm, steady. I don't want a title handed to me because of whispers. Or out of pity. Nathan shook his head, his gaze unflinching. I'm not handing it to you. I'm naming what you've already built. For a long moment, Ellie didn't move. The weight of the past weeks pressed heavily against her chest. The whispers, the isolation, the quiet cruelty of envy. And now this. Recognition that felt both deserved and dangerous. She didn't hand the card back. But she didn't say yes either. The silence stretched, deep and heavy. Snow pressed against the windows, falling slow and steady, as if time itself had paused to listen. The world shifted months later, the storm behind them giving way to something quieter. Lucerne lay under a curtain of soft snow, the lake shimmering beneath the mountain shadows. Old stone bridges arched across the water, their cobbled paths glowing faintly with lamplight. Ellie walked those paths with Nathan and Benji at her side. The boy's red coat stood out against the white, his mittened hands swinging back and forth as he chattered about ducks in the river, elevators at the hotel, and the 3 languages he'd overheard in the lobby. Nathan listened intently, slowing his stride to match Benji's small steps. Every nod, every smile, carried a softness Ellie hadn't seen before. He wasn't the powerful CEO here. He was just a man walking with a child who trusted him completely. Ellie lagged behind slightly, watching the two of them together. The air was crisp, the snow catching in her hair, and for the first time, she felt the shape of something forming, something that had no name yet, but refused to be ignored. At the edge of a stone bridge, she stopped. Nathan turned back, brows lifting slightly. She didn't falter. Her voice was quiet, steady. Have you ever thought about putting a name on whatever this is? The words hung between them, fragile as the snowflakes landing on their coats. Nathan didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her. Snow clung to her golden hair, her cheeks flushed with the cold. There was no hesitation in her eyes, only vulnerability laid bare. And then, with a slow breath, he stepped closer. His hand went into his coat pocket. In one motion, he dropped to one knee on the snowy street. Ellie gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. The velvet box opened, not to some glittering, ostentatious display, but to something simple, refined. A ring chosen not for show, but for meaning. Nathan's voice cracked slightly, rougher than usual. I don't need to define this anymore. Ellie, I love you, and I love Benji like he's my own flesh and blood. I want to build a life with both of you. For real. No spaces in between. No quiet may. He lifted his eyes to hers. Will you marry me? Tears welled in Ellie's eyes, her breath trembling in the cold air. She nodded once, then again, stronger. Yes, she whispered. Yeah. From across the bridge, Benji had turned to see. His little boots pounded across the snow as he ran toward them, his voice echoing with joy. She said yes. She said yes. He wrapped his arms around Ellie's legs before looking up at Nathan, his eyes bright. Can I call you Dad now? Nathan dropped the ring box, pulling both of them into a fierce embrace. His voice broke, but the words were clear. "Yeah, buddy, you can." In that moment, on a snowy bridge in Switzerland, the three of them became something that needed no translation. They had translated life into love, but love always attracts eyes, envy, and danger. A year later, the sharp bite of winter had given way to the gentle breath of spring. Waves rolled against the main shoreline, soft and unhurried, carrying with them the scent of salt and blooming things. The ceremony was small. No chandeliers, no gilded halls. Just a wooden deck overlooking the sea, driftwood chairs tied with white ribbons, and seagulls crying faintly in the distance. The ocean itself was their witness. Ellie stood at the end of the aisle, her dress simple and unadorned, ivory linen that flowed like sea foam at her feet. Her hair was loosely braided, sprigs of lavender woven between the strands, a quiet tribute to her late mother. Nathan waited beneath an archway of white flowers, his suit a soft gray, no tie, just a lavender handkerchief in his pocket to match hers. At his side stood Benji, small and solemn, clutching a velvet box nearly too large for his hands. The moment Ellie reached the front, her eyes found Nathan's, and nothing else existed. The guests, the sea, the breeze, they all faded into silence. The vows were short, not weighed down by performance. Promises, laughter, a few tears. When they said, "I do," Benji sniffled, and Ellie knelt to hug him before Nathan leaned down to kiss her. Later, as the guests wandered toward the reception tent, Ellie slipped away for a moment of quiet. She stood on the balcony of their rented beach house, looking out at the endless horizon, the waves whispering against the rocks. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. "You ever think," he murmured, "that the woman who used to serve me coffee would end up being the person I'd love for the rest of my life?" Ellie smiled softly, leaning back into him. "No, but I always knew I'd be the one who understood you in any language." Nathan pressed a slow kiss to her temple. "And from today forward, I get to be the man for both of you officially." She turned in his arms, hands resting against his chest. "You already were." Down on the sand, Benji was chasing the tide, rolling his slacks to his knees and shrieking with laughter each time the water touched his toes. His joy carried on the breeze, the sound of a child finally safe. Ellie and Nathan walked down together to meet him, hand in hand. 3 figures, 3 sets of footprints, 3 lives bound not by blood or chance, but by choice. The sun was lowering now, tinting the water in shades of gold. The family walked the shoreline, the surf whispering against their ankles, their arms swinging in rhythm with Benji's laughter. The world seemed at peace. No contracts, no whispers, no walls of glass. Just them, and the sea, and the unshakable truth that love needed no translation. But peace has a way of breaking. High above the beach, on the bluff where the grass met stone, stood a figure. Still, watching. They did not move closer. They did not call out. They only stood with the ocean wind at their back, eyes fixed on Ellie. They knew her past. They knew the truth she had never spoken aloud, the one secret she had carried longer than any contract or clause. And soon, they would tell it.